Many assume that speaking frequently displays intellect, confidence, and control. But in truth, those who hold the greatest sway over others are often those who speak with precision and intention. In every exchange, you'll find two types of people: those who react and speak quickly, and those who absorb, reflect, and respond deliberately. The latter consistently maintain the upper hand. This book is not an invitation to remain silent, but a call to develop the discipline to speak with purpose. In modern conversations, people tend to talk reactively, filling quiet moments with unnecessary words, often missing vital information, and becoming predictable. In doing so, they relinquish influence over the direction of dialogue and diminish their impact, both personally and professionally. True understanding of others begins when we stop speaking and start observing. The ability to listen deeply, to watch closely, and to process with care grants an awareness few possess. Communication isn't only verbal. The subtleties of tone, posture, and silence reveal as much, if not more, than words. Those who learn to decode these cues build a sharper sense of what's happening beneath the surface. This audiobook presents a practical framework for mastering this skill. It is about learning to draw attention without begging for it, about commanding respect without ever asking for approval, and about steering conversations with quiet precision, not loud interruption. When practiced, these techniques will allow you to gain more information than you give, make clearer decisions, and develop a natural aura of authority. Each moment of interaction is a chance to learn. Yet, most people reduce their potential by overtalking and underlistening. The strategy explored here aims to reverse that pattern. By the end, you will possess tools to elevate your communication, deepen your understanding of others, and carry a presence that earns respect and influence, without needing to raise your voice. Let's begin. In today's hyperverbal world, it's easy to believe that power lies in the ability to speak the most. We're taught to avoid silence, to lead conversations, and to always make sure we're heard. But in truth, those who influence the most are rarely the ones who speak constantly. They are the ones who speak when it counts. Think back to any setting where one person, without saying a word, drew every eye in the room. That kind of magnetism isn't born of noise, but of intentional presence. The less we speak, the more space we give ourselves to observe, to listen, and to gain clarity. With that clarity, our influence becomes natural and effective. When we talk less, others listen more. Influence is not about overpowering others with speech, it's about knowing the right moment to say the right thing. Silence, used wisely, is not a weakness but a strength. In silence, there is space for thoughts to settle, for meaning to surface, and for others to share. There's a common mistake we make, believing that constant talking adds value. But in truth, the more freely words are used, the more their value declines. By contrast, when words are chosen carefully and sparingly, they grow in impact. People begin to notice that you don't speak often, but when you do, it's worth listening to. This reputation becomes a powerful asset. You're no longer just participating in a conversation, you're shaping its outcome. Your words carry the weight of insight and consideration. They stem not from impulse, but from reflection. Talking less gives you the chance to listen more. And when you truly listen, you begin to see what others miss. The tone shifts, the pauses, the discomfort in their voice, or the sparkle when they talk about something they care about. These are the moments that reveal what people really feel, often more than their words ever will. Listening lets you catch the unspoken truths. It allows you to understand others not just intellectually, but emotionally. And with that understanding, you become someone who navigates conversations. Not as a reactor, but as a leader. In negotiations, silence becomes your greatest ally. When tensions rise, our instincts push us to fill the gap with words, to ease the discomfort. But silence applies pressure. It prompts the other person to reveal more than they intended. They fill the space. And in doing so, they may disclose what they otherwise wouldn't have. By simply staying silent and observing, you gather information that might shift your entire approach. You learn more by waiting than by pushing. Listening also builds trust. People want to be heard. They feel respected when you pay attention, not just to what they say, but to what they mean. This validation fosters a relationship of trust. And with trust, influence grows. When someone believes you understand them, they begin to value your words and your silence. It becomes a cycle. You listen, they trust you, and as trust deepens, so does your impact. Your thoughts are received with greater openness, and your presence becomes a calming, guiding force. The more you listen, the more you see. Patterns in people's behavior emerge. Emotional shifts become clearer. Even the needs people are too afraid to express come into focus. And it's not just about listening, it's about listening with intent. This is what separates passive hearing from active influence. Intentional listening is about giving your full presence to the person speaking, not mentally preparing your reply. It's about creating space for insight, not just words. With this space, your mind has time to think before it responds. You begin responding with depth, not with noise. You move from reacting to leading, from talking to communicating. This is the beginning of speaking with purpose. Let me know when to continue with part 2. When you develop the discipline to think before you speak, something powerful happens. Your words start to come from a place of insight, not impulse. You begin to trust the power of silence, to welcome it rather than fear it. And with that silence comes a new level of influence. The less you speak, the more weight your words carry. People begin to notice that when you open your mouth, it's not to fill space, it's to offer clarity. You don't waste words. You don't speak to be heard. You speak to make a difference. Over time, this transforms your reputation. You're seen as someone who brings value to every conversation, not just sound. This doesn't happen by accident. It takes conscious effort. It takes letting go of the pressure to impress with volume, and instead, learning to impress with substance. It's not easy, but it's powerful. And it begins with becoming an observer. In a world flooded with distractions, constant updates, and ceaseless talking, most people miss what's right in front of them. But not the observer. The observer steps back. Watches. Notices. They don't just look, they see. They don't just hear, they listen. Observation is an underrated superpower. It's the ability to notice the flicker in someone's eyes, the tremor in their voice, the fidget of their hands. It's about watching a conversation unfold. Not just hearing the words but grasping the hidden emotions behind them. And it's about letting those subtle cues guide your understanding. People say a lot more than they realize when they speak. Their movements, their tone, their pacing, it all reveals what they're truly feeling. But you can only pick up on this if you're not preoccupied with waiting for your turn to talk. Observation shifts you from participant to navigator. You no longer walk into conversations with a predetermined script. Instead, you adapt based on what you learn in real time. You listen not just for content, but for context. This is especially powerful in situations where control matters. Meetings, negotiations, leadership scenarios. The person who observes well walks into a room and reads the temperature before they say a word. They know who holds influence, who feels unheard, who's insecure, who's ready to be challenged. And they adjust accordingly. When you pay close attention, you begin to see behavioral patterns, how people respond under pressure, what topics energize them, what phrases make them retreat. This level of awareness gives you an enormous edge. It allows you to engage on a deeper level, not just reacting to people's words, but aligning with their state of mind. But observation isn't only outward, it's inward too. You learn to observe yourself, your reactions, your biases, your habits. You begin to ask, why did I feel the need to interrupt? Why did that person's tone upset me? Why did I want to fill that silence? When you observe without judgment, you give yourself the opportunity to grow. You begin to change the way you show up. You no longer react automatically. You pause. You think. You choose. This is the root of self-awareness, and without it, influence is shallow. To develop this skill, you must slow down. In a world that rewards speed and noise, slowing down feels unnatural. But speed without clarity is chaos. By giving yourself space to observe, you start to notice opportunities that others miss. And with that comes emotional intelligence. Observation is the gateway to understanding emotions, not just your own, but others. You start to recognize what's said and what's suppressed. You can spot when someone's confident, or when they're masking fear. You learn what motivates them, what concerns them, what inspires them. This is what makes communication impactful. It's not about memorizing phrases or learning to win conversations. It's about developing the sensitivity to engage people where they are, not where you assume they are. People often think they need to dominate to lead. But the true leader is usually the best observer in the room. They say little, but when they do speak, it cuts through the noise. They speak directly to people's unspoken thoughts. And that's what makes their words unforgettable. To get there, you must become curious. Replace assumptions with questions. Replace judgment with interest. Replace reaction with awareness. Don't approach conversations trying to insert your story. Approach with the intent to learn someone else's. This isn't about being passive. It's about being purposeful. You're not holding back out of fear. You're holding back out of discipline. You're choosing when to speak, how to speak, why to speak. Every word becomes a choice, not a reflex. In the moments where others are racing to be heard, you step back and observe. You take it all in. You understand what's not being said. And you wait. Because when you finally do speak, the impact will be greater than any long-winded monologue. This is how true influence works. It's quiet. It's calm. It's composed. It doesn't chase the spotlight. It commands it without asking. And it all starts by watching the room before you try to change it. Let me know when to continue with part 3. You said one. ChatGPT said, here is part 3 of the rewritten and restructured audiobook script. There's a quiet magic that unfolds when you begin to think clearly. When your mind isn't cluttered by constant chatter, both external and internal, you start to make sharper decisions. Conversations become easier. Ideas come quicker. Life feels less like a scramble and more like a flow. The clarity you seek doesn't come from trying to think faster. It comes from simplifying your thinking. And one of the most effective ways to simplify your thinking is to speak less. Every time you speak without thinking, you're adding noise to your own mind. You're reacting instead of responding. You're getting lost in words that don't serve your purpose. But when you pause, when you let the silence do its work, you give your thoughts space to breathe. Our minds are constantly bombarded. Texts, alerts, opinions, decisions. And in trying to keep up with everything, we lose clarity. It's like trying to find your way through a fog with a flashlight that keeps flickering. But if you stop and let the fog clear, if you wait, if you observe, direction becomes visible. The same principle applies to our thinking. When we reduce the input, the insight becomes clearer. Mental clarity is a byproduct of silence. Not silence as absence, but silence as presence. When you stop talking long enough to actually think, you create an internal space where understanding can take root. It's not about suppressing your voice. It's about using it more intentionally. Think of your mind like a cluttered room. If everything's scattered, books, clothes, papers, you can't find what you're looking for. But if you tidy one corner at a time, order returns. Thought works the same way. When you stop dumping random dialogue into your mental space, you begin to see what's essential. Start your day with stillness. Even 5 minutes of intentional quiet can change your mental tone. Let your thoughts settle before you add anything new. In that stillness, you might find that what you thought was urgent isn't, and what you were overlooking matters deeply. This practice of clarity extends into how we speak. When your thoughts are clear, your communication becomes laser-focused. You don't ramble. You don't over-explain. You say only what needs to be said, no more, no less. And that's when people begin to truly listen. Because clarity is magnetic. It cuts through confusion. It signals confidence. It shows that you know what you're about, and you're not wasting anyone's time proving it. The more you refine your thinking, the less you'll feel the need to defend it. Clarity removes the insecurity that fuels over-talking. You no longer speak to fill the space. You speak to shift the energy. One of the biggest challenges to mental clarity is the pressure to be quick. We associate speed with intelligence. But real intelligence is the ability to pause, analyze, and deliver insight, not just information. A clear mind doesn't rush to respond. It listens fully, processes carefully, and then acts. In that space between hearing and answering is where the smartest decisions are made. And when clarity becomes your habit, you begin to trust your own silence. You stop fearing those pauses in conversation. Instead, you use them to think. You use them to observe. And then, when the time is right, you speak, and what you say lands with strength. This is especially powerful in fast-paced environments, meetings, arguments, negotiations. When everyone else is reacting, you're reflecting. When others are scrambling to speak, you're pausing to think. And when you do speak, your words cut through the noise. Because they're not reactive, they're refined. This doesn't mean you have to become slow or withdrawn. It means you become precise. It means your mind becomes like a sharp blade, able to cut cleanly through any situation because it's not dulled by excess. And just like a sharpened tool, it takes practice. Throughout your day, take small pauses. Before you respond to an email. Before you answer a question. Before you jump into a conversation. Give yourself a moment to process. A moment to think. That moment changes everything. It resets your energy. It centers your intention. It ensures that when you speak, you're not just adding noise, but offering something that matters. Clarity doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing less, more deliberately. So speak less. And watch your thinking accelerate. You'll find that you make decisions faster, not because you're rushing, but because you've cleared away everything that doesn't matter. You'll find that you understand others more deeply, not because you talked them into something, but because you listened long enough to understand what they truly meant. You'll find that people start turning to you, not for noise, but for clarity. Let me know when to continue with part 4. When you look closely at the most successful people, those who shape industries, lead movements, or quietly change lives, you'll notice something unexpected. Many of them are not loud. They're not the ones dominating every conversation or constantly putting themselves at the center. Instead, they are calm, measured, and deliberate. These are the quiet geniuses. They've mastered the art of letting their presence speak louder than their words. They don't rush to share everything they know. They don't need to impress you with talk. They let their impact do the speaking. There's a strength in their silence, a focus that commands attention. The less they talk, the more weight their words carry. Their restraint becomes a signal. When they do choose to speak, people listen. And more importantly, people remember. This is not about hiding. It's about harnessing control. It's about recognizing that energy, focus, and intention travel further than noise ever could. In every setting. Whether it's a high-stakes negotiation or a casual discussion, those who choose their words with care stand out. While others may speak to be seen, the quiet genius speaks only when their words are necessary. And that restraint makes every word hit harder. But how do they do it? They embrace silence. Not just as a tactic, but as a state of being. They understand that silence isn't empty, it's filled with power. It allows them to observe, to read the room, and to gather far more insight than those rushing to be heard. This insight leads to better decisions. It leads to stronger relationships. It leads to smarter moves. Because when you're not distracted by your own voice, you can focus on what really matters. The quiet genius isn't passive. They're intentional. They don't sit back and let life pass them by. They act with precision. They know when to move, when to speak, and when to simply wait. And that patience gives them an edge. In a world obsessed with speed, the ability to slow down becomes a superpower. While others burn themselves out chasing attention, the quiet genius conserves energy for what truly counts. They also understand the value of listening. Deep, focused listening, not just to words, but to tone, timing, and what's left unsaid. And because they listen more than they speak, they connect more. They understand people more. They know what others need, sometimes before they even say it. This level of awareness makes their contributions sharp, timely, and impactful. They don't waste words. They speak with purpose. And as a result, they gain influence without chasing it. In the workplace, this shows up in surprising ways. While the loudest voices often get the first attention, it's usually the quiet thinkers who are shaping the outcomes behind the scenes. They speak when it matters. They lead with calm. And they solve problems with a clarity others miss. In leadership, this is even more true. The best leaders aren't the ones constantly shouting instructions or demanding recognition. They're the ones who listen first, who observe, who wait. Then, when they speak, their voice carries authority, not because it's loud, but because it's grounded in wisdom. Their silence is their strength. It gives them the chance to process, to understand, and to respond in ways that resonate. They don't just speak to fill the air. They speak to move the conversation forward. In arguments, their silence becomes disarming. When others raise their voices, they stay steady. They don't react, they respond. And in doing so, they shift the dynamic. They bring calm to conflict. They show control when others lose theirs. This kind of presence builds respect. People naturally trust someone who doesn't need to dominate. They look to the one who remains composed, who listens deeply, and who speaks with confidence, not desperation. Being quiet doesn't mean being passive. It means being powerful in a different way. A smarter way. A more lasting way. The quiet genius doesn't strive to be the center of attention. They create impact so deep that attention finds them. They don't rush to speak just to prove they know something. They speak only when they know it will help. And that choice makes all the difference. They influence without force. They lead without needing validation. And they earn respect not through volume, but through vision, presence, and restraint. The truth is, people who speak less often accomplish more, not by accident, but by design. They remove the clutter. They eliminate distraction. They operate from a place of clarity. And that clarity becomes their compass. So if you want to have more influence, speak less. If you want to be remembered, say only what matters. If you want to lead, start by listening. The quiet genius knows this. Words can inspire, but silence can transform. And when both are used intentionally, there is no limit to what you can accomplish. Let me know when to continue with part 5. There's something fascinating about how conversations unfold. We assume that whoever talks the most is in control. But the reality is often the opposite. Control doesn't always come from speaking, it often comes from choosing not to speak. Silence has a strange kind of power. It's not passive. It's not weakness. It's not hesitation. When used with intention, silence is influence. It allows you to steer a conversation without ever interrupting. It gives you the ability to hold the attention of others without raising your voice. And it creates a psychological space where you can observe, assess, and decide with precision. Most people rush to fill silence. They get uncomfortable when a pause lingers. Their instinct is to speak, to react, to say something. But the one who remains silent holds the advantage. They shift the dynamic. They create a rhythm that others subconsciously follow. Think about the last conversation you had where you let silence do the talking. Chances are, you learn more by not saying anything than you would have by dominating the discussion. When you stay quiet, others feel compelled to speak more. They'll fill the silence, often revealing more than they intended. In trying to avoid the discomfort of silence, people tend to over-explain, to confess, or to show their hand. And that's when you gain clarity. This doesn't mean you manipulate the situation. It means you guide it, quietly, intentionally. The most effective communicators know this. They don't rush to answer. They don't feel the need to always respond first. Instead, they wait. They observe. They allow silence to pressure others, not in a harmful way, but in a way that draws out deeper truth. In those moments, the quietest person often gains the most insight. Silence also changes perception. When you're comfortable being quiet, people begin to see you differently. You're not just another voice in the room, you're a presence. Your composure signals strength. It suggests you're not speaking out of emotion but from intention. People start to pay attention when you speak because they know you don't waste words. They trust that what you say has meaning. You become the kind of person whose silence is noticed, and whose words are remembered. And this ability to control the flow of conversation without dominating it builds respect. It shows others that you value listening, that you're patient, that you don't need to prove yourself through constant talking. This quiet confidence becomes a source of strength. But it takes discipline. It's not easy to resist the urge to speak, especially in high-stakes situations, or when emotions run high. We're wired to respond. We're trained to talk things through, to assert ourselves, to push our point. But there's a smarter way. When you pause before responding, when you take a breath and give yourself time, you create an edge. That moment of silence allows you to process everything that's just been said, to separate what's useful from what's noise, and to respond not from ego, but from clarity. In that moment, you're not just talking. You're leading. This technique is incredibly powerful in negotiation. When you stay quiet after making a proposal, for example, you put the pressure on the other person. They'll feel compelled to respond, even if they weren't ready. And in doing so, they may reveal their concerns, their limits, or their expectations. In that gap of silence, information flows. In meetings, the same holds true. The person who listens, who reflects, who only speaks when needed, quickly gains a reputation. They're seen as wise, thoughtful, and strategic. Their contributions are respected. Their presence is sought out. Because everyone knows, when they speak, it's worth listening to. Even in conflict, silence is a tool. When arguments escalate, most people meet fire with fire. But silence disarms. It interrupts the expected pattern. It shifts the energy. And often, it makes the other person stop and think. The person who doesn't react emotionally, who listens, who pauses, signals control. That control calms the storm. And in that calm, better solutions can emerge. But mastering silence doesn't mean staying quiet all the time. It means using quiet strategically. It's about knowing when not to speak, when to let things unfold, when to hold space instead of filling it. It's about using silence to gather, to assess, to observe, and then to speak with impact. This is not a passive act. It's an active choice. A powerful choice. And the more you practice it, the more you'll see its effects. You'll notice people opening up around you. You'll gain information others miss. You'll feel less pressure to prove yourself. And most importantly, you'll begin to guide conversations not with your voice, but with your presence. Silence becomes your leverage, your advantage, your influence. So the next time you're in a conversation, try something different. Instead of rushing to speak, lean back. Let the moment breathe. Watch what happens. You'll be surprised how much power is in your pause. Let me know when to continue with part 6. Silence isn't just a pause in conversation, it's a language of its own. It carries emotion, it shapes perception, and it has the power to transform the entire rhythm of communication. To master the psychology of silence is to understand influence at its deepest level. While most people rush to speak, the one who holds silence creates tension, not in a hostile way, but in a compelling way. Silence draws people in. It makes them curious. It triggers a psychological response. Why aren't they saying anything? What are they thinking? Did I say something wrong? The brain craves resolution. When a silence lingers, the mind feels the need to fill it. And that's exactly where the advantage lies. Most people don't realize how much they reveal when they speak, not just through the words they use, but through what those words imply. Their energy, their emotions, their fears, and even their intentions slip out in the details. But if you're always the one talking, you miss those signs. The person who masters silence learns to read far more than what's spoken. They pick up on microexpressions, voice inflections, changes in breathing, or the hesitation before a sentence. All of these give away more than the actual words. In silence, you listen differently. You don't just hear, you decode. You start noticing who's nervous, who's bluffing, who's seeking validation. And once you recognize that, you gain a kind of X-ray vision in conversation. You're not guessing. You're seeing. This gives you the ability to respond with laser precision. You're not reacting to the surface. You're addressing the underlying current. And that kind of response lands deeper, resonates longer, and shifts dynamics permanently. But to get here, you need to be comfortable with stillness. And that takes practice. Because silence makes most people uneasy. They see it as awkward. They feel compelled to escape it by talking. But those who understand its value don't run from it. They settle into it. They let it work for them. Silence is also a signal. It tells people, I am not desperate to be heard. I am not trying to impress. I am fully in control of myself. That kind of energy is powerful. It commands attention, not because it's loud, but because it's centered. When you choose not to speak, people take notice. They start analyzing you, wondering what you're thinking. And that curiosity creates presence. It gives you psychological space. It also gives you control. Control not through manipulation, but through mastery. You're not dictating the conversation. You're guiding it without force. And in doing so, you lead others in a way that feels natural and respectful. Silence is particularly potent in high-stakes situations, negotiations, arguments, leadership decisions. While others react emotionally, you remain composed. That composure disorients those who expect a typical response. It unsettles them, and in doing so, it creates an opening, an advantage. It also builds credibility. A person who speaks with urgency often loses authority. Their words seem rushed, emotional, reactive. But the one who takes a beat, who allows silence before they speak, immediately commands more respect. Their words seem considered, their perspective more trustworthy. Over time, people start looking to you for clarity. They value your input because it's not always available. It's earned. It's rare. And that rarity makes it powerful. In conflict, silence is often more effective than argument. It removes fuel from the fire. It creates a void where others expect resistance, and that void forces them to rethink their approach. Instead of escalating, you deflate the tension. Not by conceding, but by holding space, by allowing the other person's energy to burn out without giving it anything to fight against. This is emotional control at its highest level. But the greatest benefit of silence might not be external at all. It might be what it does for you. When you allow silence in your life, not just in conversation, but in your daily experience, you open space for insight. You start hearing your own thoughts more clearly. You reflect more deeply. You grow more intentionally. Most people are drowning in noise, reacting to every alert, every notification, every thought. But silence creates clarity. And in that clarity, you begin to make better decisions, not just in how you speak, but in how you live. You begin to act from intention, not habit. You learn to ask, does this need to be said? Does this need to be done? Am I reacting or am I choosing? That shift changes everything. Because it's not just about having fewer conversations, it's about having better ones. Ones that are thoughtful. Ones that are impactful. Ones where every word matters. Silence becomes your filter. It helps you strip away the unnecessary. And what remains is what's true, what's powerful, what's effective. So if you want to elevate your communication, start with silence. If you want to gain influence, start by listening. If you want to lead, start by mastering the pause. Because in a world that's loud and fast, the one who can sit with silence, the one who can wait, observe, and respond with purpose, will always rise above the noise. Let me know when to continue with part 7. Words matter. But not in the way most people think. It's not the number of words you use, but the intention behind them that gives them power. The most influential people don't speak the most, they speak the smartest. They know how to compress meaning into just a few words. They understand that clarity trumps quantity, that brevity commands attention, and that silence, when paired with precision, becomes a force of persuasion. Every conversation is an opportunity to create impact. But most people dilute that opportunity by saying too much. They overexplain, they repeat, they talk themselves into corners. Their message gets buried under a pile of unnecessary words. But when you learn to strip away the fluff, when you speak only what needs to be said, you stand out. You come across as clear, confident, and composed. You speak like someone who knows what they're doing. And people respect that. This is the science of smart speaking: minimal words, maximum impact. When you say less, people lean in. They pay closer attention. They sense that your words are deliberate. That you're not talking just to fill space. That you're saying something that matters. And in a world filled with noise, that kind of presence is rare and magnetic. Brevity isn't just about talking less. It's about choosing better. Every sentence should carry weight. Every word should have purpose. If it doesn't add to the message, it subtracts from it. This mindset forces you to think more clearly. You begin asking yourself, what am I really trying to say? How can I say it more directly? Is there a simpler way? And that process sharpens your thinking, not just your communication. You stop relying on long explanations. You begin crafting messages with clarity and confidence. That clarity builds trust. It shows that you value other people's time, that you respect their attention, and that you're focused enough to say what you mean without dressing it up. People notice. They begin to listen to you differently, not as someone who's just talking, but as someone who's teaching, leading, guiding. Someone who understands the power of each word and uses it wisely. And that kind of communicator stands out in every room. But this level of communication doesn't happen by accident. It takes practice. It takes discipline. It takes the willingness to pause before speaking, to let your mind process instead of jumping in with filler. It also takes emotional control. Because often, we speak too much when our emotions are driving the conversation. We try to explain our frustration, justify our decisions, or prove our worth. And in doing so, we lose impact. But the person who speaks with calm, with clarity, with intention, regardless of the emotion, gains influence. They project authority. They speak from stability, not insecurity. And that kind of speech is unforgettable. Minimal words don't mean minimal emotion. They mean focused emotion. Controlled emotion. Purposeful communication that lands where it's supposed to, without needing to be loud or lengthy. This is especially important in leadership. Leaders who speak with precision inspire confidence. Their teams don't need long speeches. They need direction, clarity, focus. And when a leader can say more with less, it creates alignment. People understand the vision. They trust the voice. They follow because they feel guided, not overwhelmed. In business, brevity leads to better negotiations, more effective meetings, and stronger relationships. In life, it leads to deeper conversations, fewer misunderstandings, and more genuine connection. Because what you say becomes more valuable when people know you don't speak unless there's something worth saying. This doesn't mean you should withhold your thoughts. It means you refine them. You bring them forward in their sharpest, clearest form. You allow silence to carry the weight your words don't need to. And in doing so, you change the energy of every room you walk into. The science of smart speaking is really the art of presence. Of being fully aware of what you're saying, why you're saying it, and how it will land. It's about trusting that less can be more. When less is packed with intention. So from now on, don't just talk. Communicate. Don't just fill silence. Command attention. Don't just speak because you can. Speak because it matters. Your words are powerful. But only if you give them space to breathe. Space to land. Space to be heard. Use fewer words. Make everyone count. Let me know when to continue with part 8. Respect isn't earned through volume. It's not achieved by speaking over others or forcing your opinion into every space. True respect is rooted in presence, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you listen, and in the way you speak only when necessary. Most people confuse attention with respect. They think that being the loudest or most visible will win admiration. But attention fades. Respect lingers. And it's not something you can demand, it must be inspired. You inspire respect not by taking up space, but by valuing it. By making others feel heard. By communicating in a way that doesn't just express your thoughts, but honors the thoughts of others. And the most effective way to do that? Through silence and intentional speech. When you truly listen to someone, without waiting to respond, without planning your next argument, you signal that their voice matters. You make them feel seen. And in return, they begin to see you as someone they can trust. Respect is reciprocal. It's mirrored. The more you offer it through your attention and restraint, the more you receive it without asking. This is one of the most powerful traits in leadership, not just formal leadership, but the kind that shows up in families, friendships, communities. People respect those who respect them. Not in theory, but in action. Listening, real, focused listening, is an act of generosity. It says you matter. Your words are worth my time. And when you combine listening with presence, when you show up with calm, clarity, and conviction, you elevate the quality of every interaction. People begin to seek your input, not because you push it, but because they trust it. And that trust grows stronger every time your actions align with your words. Because consistency builds credibility. When what you say and what you do match, repeatedly, reliably, others begin to count on you. They may not always agree with you, but they'll respect you. Because they know you stand for something real. They know your voice isn't just noise, it's backed by values. This is how quiet influence works. It doesn't need to dominate to be felt. It doesn't need to perform to be respected. It shows up, steady and intentional, and lets time do the proving. There's also a quiet kind of confidence that commands more respect than any loud proclamation ever could. It's not about arrogance. It's about being rooted in your worth, without needing external validation. When you're confident in who you are, you don't rush to speak. You don't need to convince people to agree with you. You're okay with disagreement. You're okay with silence. You're okay being misunderstood temporarily, because your focus isn't on approval, but on alignment. This kind of confidence shows in your tone, in your timing, in your restraint. People feel it. And they respond to it. Because in a world where everyone seems to be shouting to be noticed, the person who's centered, composed, and thoughtful becomes rare and valuable. But commanding respect also means knowing when to admit mistakes. It means being vulnerable enough to say, I was wrong. I don't know. I'm learning. This vulnerability doesn't weaken your image, it strengthens it. It shows you're honest. That you're real. That you're not playing a role, you're living with integrity. People respect those who are human enough to grow and humble enough to admit when they don't have all the answers. The idea isn't to be perfect. The idea is to be authentic. Because authenticity builds trust. And trust is the soil where respect grows. There's also strength in emotional composure. In tense situations, those who keep their cool rise above. Not because they suppress their emotions, but because they've learned how to manage them. They respond instead of react. They speak from clarity, not chaos. This steadiness makes others feel safe. It shows leadership. It shows maturity. And over time, it earns deep, lasting respect. So, how do you command respect and authority without force? You listen before you speak. You speak with clarity and brevity. You stand by your values, even when it's uncomfortable. You stay composed, especially when others are not. You stay consistent with your promises, your boundaries, and your standards. And most of all, you stay present. Because presence, real, grounded, respectful presence, does more to build respect than any title, speech, or accomplishment ever could. And once you begin to lead this way, not through domination, but through quiet conviction, you'll find that people don't just hear you. They follow you. Not because you told them to, but because they want to. Let me know when to continue with part 9. There's a misconception that the loudest person in the room holds the most power. That visibility equals influence. That those who dominate the conversation are the ones people admire or follow. But the truth is often the opposite. In any room, whether it's a meeting, a dinner table, or a stage, the person who commands the space is rarely the one speaking the most. It's the one who speaks the least, but says the most with their presence. Because presence is more powerful than volume. When you walk into a room with clarity, composure, and a sense of purpose, people feel it, even before you speak. They sense that you're not there to compete for attention. You don't need to prove yourself. You are yourself. And that alone sets the tone. The strongest people in any space don't seek validation, they radiate certainty. Their energy leads the room, even if their words are few. They don't have to raise their voice to be heard. They don't have to interrupt to make an impact. They choose their moments with care. They wait until the right time to speak. And when they do, their words carry authority, not because of the volume, but because of the timing. This level of presence starts with how you carry yourself. Do you walk in hurried and distracted, or calm and focused? Do you speak to fill silence, or to create meaning? Do you feel the need to respond to everything? Or can you sit with a moment, fully engaged, without saying a word? These subtle shifts change everything. People are naturally drawn to those who seem grounded. To those who don't rush, who don't force, who observe before acting. Because that restraint, that patience, that confidence in silence is what real leadership looks like. And it creates influence without needing to chase it. When you carry yourself with quiet confidence, people take cues from you. They match your pace. They become more intentional with their words. You shift the entire energy of a conversation without saying much at all. In fact, when you speak less, others listen more. They know that what you're about to say isn't filler. It's something worth hearing. That's why those who are most remembered in a conversation aren't always the ones who spoke the longest. They're the ones who made their words matter. But this skill goes beyond body language and presence. It's also about emotional regulation. When you can stay calm under pressure, when you can hold your center while others lose theirs, you become the anchor in any situation. People look to you not because you demand their attention, but because your calm gives them clarity. Your presence gives them peace. Your silence gives them space to think. And space is power. When you allow space in conversation, space for thought, for reflection, for others to contribute, you create room for deeper connection. You show that you value quality over quantity, depth over dominance. This isn't about being passive. It's about being strategic. It's about observing before you speak. About letting the dynamics reveal themselves. About choosing the exact moment when your words will have the most impact. You're not trying to win the conversation. You're trying to shape it. And that shaping happens not through interruption, but through influence. Nonverbal cues matter here. The way you make eye contact. The way you sit. The way you nod, or stay still. The way you breathe. All of it contributes to the silent language of presence. And people read this language far more than they listen to your words. If you sit with confidence, if your energy is steady, if your expressions are calm, people begin to feel like they can trust you, even if they don't fully understand why. That's the kind of influence that lasts. Because it's not manufactured. It's earned through self-awareness, restraint, and deliberate action. Remember, people trust those who don't feel the need to prove themselves. The ones who hold back, who pause, who allow others to speak, not because they're unsure, but because they're certain. The less you try to dominate a room, the more you begin to own it. Not because you talk the most, but because you've mastered the art of presence. Let me know when to continue with part 10. The most powerful minds aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who know when to stay silent. To outsmart someone doesn't require arguing louder, speaking faster, or flooding a room with clever words. True intelligence is demonstrated through patience, awareness, and the ability to listen more than you speak. Those who master silence don't just avoid noise, they use it as a tool. They let others speak first. They let others reveal their thoughts, their assumptions, their weaknesses. And all the while they watch. They learn. They plan. Because silence, when intentional, is strategy. In every conversation, people are giving you data. They show you how they think. They reveal what matters to them. They give away more than they realize, if you're paying attention. But if you're always trying to be heard, you'll miss it. The quiet person often knows the most in the room. Not because they're secretly gathering information, but because they've made space for it. While everyone else is rushing to speak, they're noticing what no one else sees. Every hesitation. Every emotional cue. Every contradiction. They read between the lines. They understand not just the words, but the motivations behind them. And this is how they win, not by overpowering others, but by understanding them better than they understand themselves. That's the secret to influence. When you can anticipate what someone will say or do, because you've studied how they think, you hold the real advantage. You don't need to outtalk them. You simply wait for the moment where your response carries more truth than anything they've said. In a negotiation, silence is pressure. When someone makes an offer and you say nothing, it creates tension. It forces them to keep talking, to explain, to justify, to reveal more than they intended. And every word they add gives you more power. This isn't manipulation. It's discipline. It's the understanding that those who react emotionally are easy to predict, and those who are predictable are easy to defeat. But when you're silent, you become unreadable. And when people can't read you, they become cautious. They start questioning their assumptions. They treat your presence with respect, even if they don't realize why. Unpredictability is power. When you don't reveal your thoughts too early, when you don't show your hand, you maintain control. You choose your timing. You reveal information selectively. And by doing so, you stay 3 steps ahead. Meanwhile, those who feel the need to respond immediately, who can't tolerate silence, are constantly giving away their thoughts. Their urgency becomes their weakness. Your silence, on the other hand, becomes your shield. But it also becomes your lens. Because the less you speak, the more clearly you see. You begin to notice the true structure of a conversation, the emotional shifts, the power plays, the hidden agendas. You don't need to interrupt. You simply wait. Watch. Learn. And then, when the time is right, you speak. And your words are sharper than anything said before. Because they're not impulsive. They're precise. They come from insight, not ego. From clarity, not confusion. This is how you outsmart anyone. By listening more, speaking less, and moving only when it counts. Because intelligence isn't about how fast you can talk, it's about how deeply you can understand. And understanding comes from restraint. From observation. From silence. So the next time you feel the urge to prove your point, pause. The next time someone challenges you, listen first. The next time a conversation becomes heated, be the one who stays calm, who speaks second, and who holds their ground through presence, not volume. In that space, between impulse and response, is where your power lives. You don't need to be the loudest. You don't need to be the most visible. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply need to know who you are, observe what's unfolding, and wait for your moment to speak with intention. Because the one who controls their words controls their world. That is how you speak less and influence more.